Once upon a time, one day, an ancient king summoned the chief judge of the capital and ordered him to appoint a judge for one of the cities. The chief judge shared this matter with his 4 students and said, "Be ready. Tomorrow, after the court session, I will test you and introduce one of you to the king as judge of that city." The next morning, several defendants were to be tried. The chief judge and his students attended the session, and the court was formally opened. The prosecutor asked the accused to introduce himself and then said, "This man is accused of selling meat and fat from a dead cow to the people. We wish to hear the story from the plaintiff." The plaintiff, a big-bellied man, introduced himself and said, "I am a stranger who arrived in this city 2 months ago. I admit that overeating is a bad habit, but I love korma and eat a lot of it. Before this, I lived in a village where there was no butcher to buy meat daily. So at the start of winter, we salted a sheep and cooked its meat and fat into korma. We poured it into wide-mouthed jars and used it gradually in our meals throughout the winter. When I came to this city, I asked about korma meat. It was scarce and expensive until I found a grocery that sold it cheaper than others. I became his customer and bought korma meat from him every day, until one day he said it was finished. The next day I went again, and there was none, and the day after that, still none. One day I asked his apprentice, and he said, "We will never have korma again." I insisted and said, "If you won't sell it at that price, just say so." He said, "No, we no longer have korma. You'd better buy fresh meat from a butcher and give up eating korma, because korma is truly expensive and making it is not worth it." I asked, "Wasn't what I bought proper korma?" He said, "No, it wasn't proper. It was meat from a dead cow." Hearing this made me sick, and I was ill for several days. Then I complained to the city governor, saying that a shopkeeper in your city sold me meat and fat from a dead cow. The governor sent both me and the shopkeeper to the chief judge for investigation. This is my story, and that man is the shopkeeper who has introduced himself. The judge told the shopkeeper, "You must stand and tell the truth of what happened. If you lie, and your lie is revealed after an investigation, your punishment will be harsher." The shopkeeper stood up and said, "What was said is true, but I am an unfortunate man. Of all worldly possessions, I had only one cow, whose milk and yogurt I sold. By bad luck, my cow became ill, and one day suddenly died. So that my capital would not be lost, I made its meat into korma and sold it, and I asked for forgiveness. The prosecutor said, according to the witnesses, this man is lying. Moreover, he owns other cows, and greed was the reason for his actions. Now his apprentice will testify. The apprentice stood and said, Your Honor, I am a God-fearing and compassionate and truthful man. We never had korma meat in the shop until one day the shop owner brought some. We sold it until it ran out. When customers came and there was no korma, I asked the master's household servant why they no longer made it. He explained the story of the dead cow. And as far as I know, the master owns other cows as well. The prosecutor asked the household servant, who was present, to tell the story. He said, We were disgusted by this and told the master that dead cow meat and fat should not be fed to people. But he said, I want to keep it for dogs and cats. Sometime later, we learned that he had taken it to the shop and sold it to people. Several other relatives of the shopkeeper also testified. Then the prosecutor said, if someone sells old clothes as new, his sin is deceiving the buyer. And if someone steals property, the loss can be compensated. But one who cheats in people's food deals with their very lives and puts human lives in danger. The punishment for such a person is the punishment of a murderer. I asked the chief judge to sentence this criminal man to death, so that it becomes a lesson to others, and no one plays with people's lives again. The chief judge thought and said, without doubt, this man's crime is the crime of one who intended to destroy people, and the death penalty is not excessive for him. Take him to prison so tomorrow he may receive punishment for his crime. And they declared the trial concluded. After the people left and the court was empty, the chief judge said to his 4 students, Now be ready for your examination. I will now present a case and ask you to judge it. A man had guests and sent his servant to buy milk from a milk seller. The servant poured the milk into a bowl and carried it on his head back home. On the way, a stork was flying, carrying a large snake it had caught. From the snake's mouth, a few drops of venom dripped into the bowl of milk. The servant brought the milk home, and they cooked a sweet dish with it. The guests ate it and perished. Now, I want you to say, if you were the judge in this incident, whom would you consider guilty? Each of you separately write your verdict on paper. The 4 students of the judge wrote their verdicts and submitted them. The chief judge took the answers and read them. The first verdict said, If I were the judge, I would hang the servant, because he did not cover the bowl of milk, allowing the snake's venom to fall into it. The chief judge said, This verdict is far from justice. It is true that food containers should generally be covered, but such a danger does not always exist that venom might fall from the air into milk. And we have no law requiring food containers to always be covered. Therefore, the servant cannot be punished. Then they read the second verdict, which says, "If I were the judge, I would consider no one guilty, because in reality the fault lies with the stroke that lifted the snake into the air, and an animal cannot be punished. It was the guest's fate and destiny to be poisoned by snake venom. Everyone dies in a different way. One dies in bed, another on the battlefield." The chief judge said, "This verdict is also incorrect. To say that it was destiny or fate is the thinking of ignorant common people. A judge must strive to distinguish right from wrong." Then they read the verdict of third student. He had written, "If I were the judge, I would punish the host, because he caused the death of the guests. Because if the host had tasted the food before serving it, he would have realized that the food was poisoned. Others would not have eaten it and would not have perished. Therefore, the host is guilty, because even without a snake, someone might have poisoned the food." The chief judge said, "This verdict, too, is far from justice, because the host suspected no one in his own home, so such caution was not required, and there is no rule that whoever prepares food for guests must taste it first. And if a stork flies in the air holding a snake in its beak, and venom drips from the snake into the milk, and the host has no knowledge of it, it is unjust to consider him guilty." Then the judge read the verdict of the fourth student. The fourth student had written, "It requires explanation." The judge asked, "What do you mean by explanation?" The fourth student said, "The explanation is that, in my opinion, the very framing of this case is flawed. That is, if a stork had taken a snake in its mouth and flown in the air, and the venom had dripped from the snake into the milk, and it had fallen so quietly that the servant did not notice. Who told you that it was a stork and that there was a snake, and that venom was dropped? If the servant had known, or if someone had seen it and told him, he would have informed the host, and they would have tasted the milk, and the guest would not have been poisoned. But if no one said anything and no one knew, who informed the chief judge of this story?" I say it needs clarification who first told the story of the stork and the snake, and how do we know it is true? If I were the judge, I would begin the investigation right here. I would summon the host, the servant, the milk seller, and the cook, and everyone who was present in that house. I would question each of them separately and compare their statements. If the stroke story is false and someone fabricated it, I would become more suspicious of that person and interrogate him more intensely to find out why he invented this story. It may be that the milk at the milk seller's shop was spoiled, and he invented this story. It is also possible that the servant, the cook, or the host himself had hostility toward the guests, and one of them poisoned the milk, and then fabricated this story. Whoever fabricated the story of the stroke and the snake is guilty. But it is also possible that the stroke and snake story is true, and someone witnessed it and reported it. All of this can be investigated. A just judge is one who does not rush in judgment and examines all aspects of the case and investigates every possible source and person, distinguishes the guilty from the innocent, and then issues punishment for the guilty. The chief judge said, "Well done. This story teaches how to distinguish truth from falsehood and not judge unjustly." The next day, the chief judge introduced the fourth student to the king, and he was appointed as judge to a city that had no judge. Dear friends, thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. Please support us with your likes and comments.